Why do you come, yellow bird? My face? My face! But God made my face. You cannot want to tear my face. Oh, Mary, this is a black art to change your shape. No, I cannot. I cannot hold my mouth. It is God's work I do. Welcome to Teacup For One.
You've no proof Jenny's a witch.
My name is Matt, and I have 2 degrees. And welcome to Witch Week. Which week? This week. For the next few days, we are going to be talking about films all about witches. And I figured what better way to start than by looking at one of the original witch stories, the 1996 film adaptation of Arthur Miller's classic play, The Crucible, the stirring American drama based on the real-life Salem Witch Trials. Even though Halloween is all about the fun spooks, I thought it would be really important and enlightening to start Witch Week by looking at this film. Witches have a long and complicated history. Kind of like genies and vampires, which we've already looked at on this channel. They're one of those figures that have a very real place in history and embedded into culture, and then just over time they've morphed into the stereotypical cartoony spooks that we're all used to seeing around Halloween time. But today, when we think about witches, we're usually thinking about them in like a fun Margaret Hamilton, Harry Potter kind of capacity. But for the longest time, the word witch was a label that was heavily associated with fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of the other, fear of dancing with the devil. And that's why The Crucible is so chilling and so effective, because it is, at its core, about fear. More specifically, fear-mongering. The Crucible is a dramatization of the real-life witch trials that took place in Salem, Massachusetts in the 1690s. It was a string of events that ended up with over 200 people being accused of witchcraft and 19 people being hanged. The trials were sparked when some local girls started acting like they were possessed. Basically, they were exhibiting behavior that there was no medical explanation for, and so everyone, of course, just assumed witchcraft, supernatural, the devil, they're all to blame. Over the past 3 centuries, there have been numerous explanations and speculations about what actually went on. Of course, at first, everyone blamed witchcraft. As time went on, people started to blame female hysteria, when that was like a scientifically acceptable diagnosis for anything, for the most part. But over the past few decades, they've actually found evidence to support that everything could have possibly been tied to ergot poisoning, which, according to my labor-intensive Wikipedia research, can result in painful seizures and spasms, diarrhea, itching, mental effects including mania or psychosis, headaches, nausea, and vomiting. So just basically all of the things that were being labeled as the results of being bewitched. No, not that bewitched. But then there's the less innocent explanation. What if the mass hysteria of the Salem Witch Trials was being fueled consciously by members of the community for their own personal gain? And that is the core concept behind Arthur Miller's fictionalized account of the whole event. He focuses his play on teenager Abigail Williams. She had an affair with local farmer John Proctor and then becomes pretty much infatuated with him. And then when he ends the relationship, it kind of turns into like a Puritan version of Fatal Attraction, but instead of boiling a bunny, Abigail starts the Salem Witch Trials. Abigail leads a group of local girls in the town, and they start accusing their neighbors of being witches, with Abigail specifically setting her sights on John Proctor's wife, Elizabeth. But now here's the kicker. Because witchcraft is an invisible crime, the law by default is pretty much always going to be on the side of the accuser. The logic is that in an act of witchcraft, you only have 2 witnesses, the witch and the victim. And the witch obviously is going to testify against themselves. So then that puts the victim in the position of being the sole witness to this invisible crime. And so then the law just has to put their blind faith in the hope that the victim / the accuser is always going to tell the truth. Now, The Crucible might be based on real-life events, and the characters even share names with the individuals that were involved with the Salem Witch Trials, but the plot, for the most part, is a fabrication. In real life, Abigail Williams was an 11-year-old child, and John Proctor was like a 60-year-old man, so they weren't having an affair. At least, I really hope they weren't having an affair. But none of that matters. Well, I mean, that would matter, but none of that matters because Arthur Miller wasn't setting out to write a documentary about the Salem Witch Trials. He was using the Salem Witch Trials to make a comment on what was happening in the world at the time with McCarthyism, surrounding fear-mongering, and the pressure to name people who might have been possibly, maybe, slightly involved with the Communist Party, and just the sheer power that came with the ability to accuse somebody with little to no evidence, hence the play's focus on the invisible crime of witchcraft. Even though the Salem Witch Trials were hundreds of years ago and McCarthyism is over, the Crucible reminds us that humans never change and that is why history is always going to be repeating itself. It's acting as a cautionary tale, just showing us how fear can be weaponized to overrule logic and empathy. And this play was written in 1953. The film was made in 1996. I watched it right now in the present, 2020. And one thing was abundantly clear, is that this story is always going to be relevant. It's an incredible script, and it's a brilliant concept, because if you set a story so far in the past, it's going to force you to watch it and figure out how it can apply to your present. And I would say that this film adaptation is pretty flawless. It's always tricky when you're adapting something from a play to a film to try to make it not feel like it's just like a filmed play, but this story and this script feels like it was meant to be put on screen. The screenplay adaptation was handled by Arthur Miller himself, and the movie takes advantage of being able to show us certain events and places and imagery that's only mentioned in the play. Like right off the top of my head, at the very beginning, we get to actually see the girls dancing in the forest, which of course later becomes Dancing with the Devil, because the devil likes dancing in forests, I guess. Being able to see the scene right at the beginning of the film puts the rest of the story into a very clear context, because our first introduction to Abigail is as a character who's willing to slaughter a chicken and drink its blood in the hopes of cursing her ex-lover's wife. So right away we understand how dangerous this person actually is, which really sets the tone for the rest of the movie when she's playing the innocent victim and accusing everyone. And the courtroom scenes are elevated to a whole new level just purely because of the visual intimacy that you get with film. Elizabeth's trial scene is basically perfect filmmaking. When it gets to that part where the judge is like, no, don't look at your husband, look at me. No, don't look at her, look at me. It realizes the tension of that moment in this beautiful way that you just plain don't get with live theater. And then you have the cast. Like, you should know by now, I am a sucker for a well-cast movie. And this film has like some of the best actors in the world, even playing small supporting roles. But for the most part, the film is carried by Daniel Day-Lewis and Winona Ryder. Like, obviously we know Daniel Day-Lewis, everything he does is going to be amazing, but I just want to take a moment to acknowledge how good Winona Ryder actually is in this movie. I looked at a couple reviews and there were some that said her performance was a little bit much. I think there was even one comment on YouTube that said she was taking a page out of like the Nicolas Cage book of acting, but here's the thing. Of course she is. Abigail Williams in The Crucible is a master manipulator. She is a performer. She's convincing an entire town that she's being attacked by the devil. Of course it's going to be melodramatic and over the top. But the genius of Winona's performance is that in between all of that, you get these beautiful, subtle, non-verbal moments where you just really see her mind at work. Like, this is a character who understands what she's doing and seemingly has no remorse whatsoever, which is what makes it so terrifying and then so infuriating at the end when people are actually being hanged and she's watching with this weird, twisted, triumphant joy. Like, she is so hateable in this movie. It's great. And then there's one other actor who doesn't get nearly as much recognition for their work in this film as they should, and that's Karron Graves as Mary Warren. It's one of those performances that just fully sneaks up on you. You think she's a side character, but then she slowly starts to steal the spotlight. Mary Warren is John Proctor's servant, while Abigail Williams is the ringleader who's drunk on her own power and playing the victim. Mary is the actual victim She's caught between a rock and a hard place with Abigail and Joan, and she is terrified to tell the truth, and she just fully breaks down because of this awful political situation that she finds herself caught in the middle of. Just all in all, The Crucible might not be your stereotypical spooky Halloween movie, but in a lot of ways, I think it's like the scariest movie on the list. And I'm actually very curious to see how Hocus Pocus holds up to it. But for now, friends, that concludes yet another episode of the Teacup For One Spooky Movie Marathon. Let me know in the comment section down below. Did you read The Crucible in high school? And did you like it? And if you want to follow me on my adventures for the rest of the Halloween Spooky Movie Marathon, but you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, you need to get on that right now. It's super easy. All you need to do is click on my face. Thanks for joining me today, everyone. My name is Matt, and I have 2 degrees, and that's the Teacup For One. Why do you come, yellow bird?